In February 2024, 20-year-old Melody Hoffman was a bright, cheerful young woman, close to her family, especially her mother, Megan. Melody was known for her loving, trusting nature. She had always been the kind of person to embrace everyone around her. A social butterfly with a passion for animals. But on one cold Saturday night, Melody's sudden disappearance would leave her family in shock. It was February 17th, and everything seemed normal. Melody and her mother had spent the day together, running errands and sharing a quiet evening at home. After a late dinner and watching a movie in bed, Megan assumed the night was over. But, as the clock ticked past 11 p.m., something unexpected happened. At 11:27 p.m., Megan received an alert on her phone. Melody's live location showed she had left the house. Megan quickly checked the camera inside their living room, and there, captured in a split second, was her daughter leaving the home, slipping out quietly into the night. Without saying a word to her mother, Melody had caught a ride in a blue Honda Accord. Megan, alarmed, began texting Melody repeatedly, asking her to come back home. But Melody's replies were unusual. They were slow, oddly worded, and felt off. Megan knew something wasn't right. Her messages were full of worry, urging Melody to turn the location tracking back on. But they went unanswered. Then, just before 3 a.m., an automatic notification pinged Megan's phone. Melody's iPhone had detected a crash. At this moment, Megan had no idea how drastically the night would unfold. The cheerful, trusting daughter she knew had unknowingly walked into a world of danger, a danger that would soon turn deadly. It wasn't until the following morning that Melody's mother, Megan, would receive the gut-wrenching news that no parent ever wants to hear. Despite her repeated attempts to contact Melody, the young woman never returned home. By then, something far more sinister had already taken place. Around 8 a.m. on February 18th, Amy Robas, a woman out for a morning walk by Lily Lake, noticed something unusual. A distraught couple approached her, pointing towards the water's edge. They had discovered something, or rather, someone. The couple, unsure of what they were seeing, called 911. "There's a body. It looks like a dead woman," Amy told the dispatcher, her voice filled with disbelief. The woman was lying face down in the grass, her body covered in marks and lacerations, her clothes in disarray. The dispatcher asked if she was in the water. "No," Amy replied, "she's just lying there, but there are marks on her back, flashes, scratches, cuts." It was clear that something was very wrong. When the authorities arrived, they found the lifeless body of Melody Hoffman, abandoned in a grassy area near the lake. Her arms were stretched out at her sides, and there were clear signs of trauma. Her body had multiple stab and slash wounds, and her back was covered in lacerations. The medical examiner later confirmed that she had died from strangulation. But something else stood out. Her injuries were not just from the attack, some of them appeared to be inflicted post-mortem, after she had already died. At first glance, the scene seemed to indicate a sexually motivated attack. However, the more the investigators examined the area, the more they began to suspect that the crime had been staged. The surrounding area was unnervingly clean. There were no signs of the violent struggle that Melody had endured. It became clear that this murder wasn't a random crime. It was planned. Lily Lake wasn't the crime scene. Investigators concluded that Melody had been murdered elsewhere and later brought to this location. The chilling realization that her killer had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks left everyone in the community shaken. As authorities began piecing the clues together, Melody's phone was discovered, broken and discarded, with all recent activity deleted. A single, automated crash notification came through at 3:13 a.m., marking the precise location where her phone was last active. But what was most disturbing was the silence that followed. There were no more texts, no more calls, just the grim discovery of her body hours later. In that moment, the search for answers intensified. Who could have done this to Melody? And why? With each new piece of evidence uncovered, investigators were drawn deeper into a web of lies and deceit. As the investigation into Melody Hoffman's brutal murder intensified, one person stood out as a key figure: McKinley Lisma, Melody's ex-boyfriend, a 20-year-old man with a troubled past. McKinley had been in a brief but intense relationship with Melody. Their breakup in December had left some tension between them, but nothing could have predicted the violent turn their story would take. It didn't take long for detectives to begin connecting the dots. Surveillance cameras had captured McKinley's blue Honda Accord driving toward Marion, Iowa, on the night of February 17th, just after Melody had left her home. The cameras tracked the car's movements, showing it passing by Morgan Creek Park, the area investigators now believed was the scene of the crime. Detectives sat down with McKinley, hoping to unravel the truth behind his involvement. At first, McKinley denied any involvement in Melody's disappearance. He claimed that the two hadn't seen each other since their breakup. But his story didn't add up. When detectives confronted McKinley with the evidence, things started to fall apart. Traffic cameras had clearly captured his car near the scene, and his vehicle was seen heading toward the park where Melody's body was eventually found. Despite the mounting evidence, McKinley continued to deny any wrongdoing, even after authorities found disturbing items in his car: machetes, duct tape, and gloves, all bought just days before Melody's death. In an attempt to cover his tracks, McKinley insisted that the machetes were bought for a camping trip and that he had nothing to do with Melody's murder. But the story didn't make sense. Why would he purchase such items if he had no intention of using them for anything other than outdoor activities? The investigators pressed him further, but McKinley was evasive. When asked about the machetes, McKinley stammered and became defensive. He claimed the trip was for camping, but his words rang hollow. As detectives dug deeper into his story, the inconsistencies became clear. Further investigation into McKinley's phone revealed troubling information. His search history showed he had looked up Morgan Creek Park and Lily Lake, the locations where Melody's body was later found. The most damning clue came from a search for face coverings, ski masks, and rubber gloves, all items that, in context, suggested a far darker plan than simply going camping. Despite his attempts to hide the truth, the evidence was mounting. McKinley was lying, and investigators knew it. It was clear that McKinley was hiding something. But what? Had he acted alone? Or was there someone else involved in the murder of Melody Hoffman? As the investigation progressed, it was revealed that McKinley's involvement wasn't the only mystery. Someone else had been involved, someone close to him, and their role in the crime would soon come to light. As investigators closed in on McKinley Lisma, another name began to surface: Dakota Van Patten, a friend of McKinley's who would turn out to be a key player in the twisted murder of Melody Hoffman. Dakota had been present that fateful night, and while McKinley had denied any involvement in Melody's murder, the truth was far more complicated. According to McKinley's own admission, Dakota had forced him into taking part in the crime. McKinley explained that, on the night of Melody's death, Dakota had brought up a disturbing plan, a plan that would soon turn deadly. McKinley reluctantly told investigators that Dakota had become suspicious that Melody had money and might be willing to help him out. He said that Dakota had pulled out a gun and demanded that McKinley tie up Melody with duct tape, suggesting that they could ransom her. But McKinley hesitated. "I thought it was a joke," he confessed. But when Dakota threatened him at gunpoint, McKinley was forced into compliance. Dakota, according to McKinley, had taken control of the situation, coercing him into helping with the terrible act that would follow. McKinley reluctantly tied up Melody, and then the situation took a far darker turn. Dakota, still holding the gun, made further demands. It was clear that whatever plan they had was escalating into something horrifying. Once Melody was bound, McKinley and Dakota drove her around, seemingly uncertain of what to do next. During the drive, McKinley, under Dakota's orders, turned Melody's phone location back on to give her mother a false sense of hope. Dakota, in an attempt to keep up the ruse, took control of Melody's phone and began texting Megan, pretending to be her daughter and telling her that everything was fine. As McKinley described it, Dakota seemed to be orchestrating everything. He sent the text messages to Megan, telling her that Melody was fine and heading to a friend's house. But as the night continued, McKinley realized how far things had gone. He couldn't stop the violence and couldn't escape Dakota's control. McKinley admitted that he was helpless. He couldn't break free from Dakota's grip. He was a passive participant, a victim of Dakota's manipulation. But his involvement couldn't be ignored. Investigators now had enough evidence to understand that this was not just McKinley's doing. Dakota Van Patten had played an active and disturbing role in Melody's death. But why? What had driven him to participate in such a brutal crime? As authorities pieced together the timeline, they found that Dakota had his own reasons for targeting Melody. The more they learned about his relationship with McKinley, the more they realized that this wasn't just a random act of violence, it was the result of a twisted bond between two young men. Driven by jealousy, manipulation, and violence, Dakota was arrested and charged alongside McKinley. The question now remained: would he be held accountable for his role in the horrific murder of Melody Hoffman? And how deep did the twisted friendship between these two men truly go? After months of investigation, the courtroom doors finally opened for justice to be served. The horrific murder of Melody Hoffman was now in the hands of the legal system. And both McKinley Lisma and Dakota Van Patten were facing charges for their brutal actions. McKinley Lisma, despite his earlier denials, was eventually convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit a felony. The evidence against him was overwhelming. His car was seen at the scene. His phone revealed key searches for the park and lake, and the machetes, duct tape, and gloves found in his car all pointed to his involvement in the gruesome crime. At the sentencing, McKinley received a mandatory life sentence without the possibility of parole. As the judge announced his fate, there was a sense of finality in the room. But it wasn't the end of the story. The devastation of Melody's loss remained, and her family, particularly her mother Megan, found a small semblance of relief knowing that McKinley would never be free again. Megan spoke directly to McKinley, reminding him of the promises he had broken, of the trust he had betrayed. "You took away the most precious thing I had, my daughter," she said, her voice unwavering. She had always cared for him as her own, but he had shown nothing but disrespect and cruelty. But McKinley wasn't the only one who would face justice. Dakota Van Patten was arrested and charged alongside him. As of now, Dakota's trial is set for March 2025, where the full extent of his involvement will be laid bare. Was he the mastermind behind the murder, or simply an accomplice to a tragic, twisted plan? The truth will soon be revealed. While McKinley's trial was a step toward justice, it wasn't the end. Megan continues to fight for the truth and for the memory of her daughter. The journey is far from over, and the community that loved Melody has vowed to keep her memory alive. Melody may be gone, but she will not be forgotten. Her story serves as a reminder of the fragility of life, the darkness that can lurk behind even the most trusting of souls, and the lengths people will go to when driven by jealousy and manipulation.